You're listening to The Taylor Marshall Show, episode 71, The Theology of Cooking Food. It's be a good one. Check it out. Here we go. Howdy, and thank you for tuning in to The Taylor Marshall Show. This is the podcast for everyone who wants to create daily habits and learn enough theology to take their faith to the next level. And my goal this week is to talk about something we all love, food. Food is sacramental. We take the life of something else and we place it in our bodies and we have life. So let's look at this long human legacy, cooking. Well, hey, welcome back to the show, to this podcast. I'm excited. It's a kind of a gloomy day down here in Texas. I'm looking out the windows. It's overcast, fog. We've just had a lot of rain down here in Texas, which we've needed for several years. But man, it's getting soggy down here. Well, every week when I sit down to record this podcast, I first read the reviews that you, the listeners, write over on iTunes. At the end of the show, for the past 20 or so episodes, I've been giving shout outs and thanking you personally. And this week, there was a review that was very peculiar because it had a reference to my father, and it's appropriate. I didn't plan it out this way, but my father is a meat scientist. He has a PhD from Texas A&M University, my own alma mater. Whoop. And he has been studying and preparing on the science side food for decades, and he's well known in his industry. And so I was a little bit amused by this recent review that a listener left over on iTunes, and it's from Lauren and Lauren and Haroldina. Lauren and Haroldina. I don't know who this is. I want to figure out. If you're listening, Lauren and Haroldina, write me an email. I want to know who you are. But they left a 5-star review. Thank you so much, Lauren and Haroldina. And they wrote this: Taylor is doing great and innovative stuff here, helping you learn your faith in an easy and fun way. It's great being able to listen to the podcast and learn something that is not just an intellectual exercise, but also things that are applicable to your daily life. Taylor has also written some great books. Read The Crucified Rabbi and the Eternal City. Thank you for that plug, Lauren and Haroldina. And then here's the interesting thing. They write, I think the stuff he is doing here is as innovative as the thermal screw is in the food prep business. All of you in the food prep business know what I'm talking about. End quote. So you might be thinking, what is this all about? Well, the thermal screw in the food prep business is an invention of my father's. That's very innovative. It allows for a thorough and a quick cook of meat, of food. And he's well known for that. So whoever Lauren and Haroldina are, they know that I'm the son of Dr. William Marshall and that he invented this thermal screw, which is just amazing that someone's put us together. So food and business and invention is part of my family tree. When I grew up in my home, meat is what paid the bills, pepperoni in particular. Going way back, some of you know this, my father in the 80s began to find ways to more quickly age pepperoni sticks. And this was really timely because in the early 80s, you might remember that pizza became a national phenomenon in the United States of America, and since then all over the world, in particular delivery pizza. And you remember Domino's had that 30 minutes or less guarantee, so you needed to get that pizza cooked and out the door and at the person's house. And my father was doing some innovative things with pizza toppings, and he hooked up with a fella named Tom Monahan. And you probably know Tom Monahan as the Catholic millionaire who founded and grew Domino's Pizza. He also went on to found Ave Maria University. Well, my father and Tom Monahan worked together. My father's company was a supplier for Domino's. And actually, I became a Christian because of an unusual interaction between a business meeting between Tom Monahan and my father. The short story is I've told it countless times at speaking events and even on audio recordings. But basically, the short story is Tom Monahan owned the Detroit Tigers at that time, and my father was in Detroit, and they were playing the Rangers at that time, where we're from, Texas. And Monahan gave my father all the autographs of the Texas Rangers, and one of the Rangers wrote under his name Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart, you'll be raised from the dead. And that was really the first time in my whole life when I read that Bible verse that was left on that autograph. That was the first time I prayed. That was the first time I confessed faith in Jesus Christ. It was from an autograph from Darrell Porter, who was the catcher for the Texas Rangers. Anyway, that's a big tangent, but it shows that my family are meat eaters. And we have loved food, the science of food. And I can tell you that growing up, the term vegetarian was pejorative. And it even had a tone like, oh, she's a vegetarian. Now, no offense to the vegetarians listening, but I'm just giving you a little bit of background for the household that I grew up, because we were a meat family, and meat preparation was what was most important for my father's occupation. So today I'm going to talk about the theology of food, and in particular, the theology of cooking. And I'm not going to bore you with my father's invention of the thermal screw. You probably don't care about that, but instead I'm going to talk about food prep and several different blessings that come from the preparation and then, of course, the consumption of food. So it's a theology of cooking food. I talked a little bit about food in the last podcast. Today, I'm going to go all out, and we're going to look at all these different blessings related to food. But before we do, we're going to begin, as we always do, with our proverb of the week. And this week's proverb of the week comes from Proverbs chapter 15, verse 17. It goes like this, quote, "Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fatted ox and hatred with it," end quote. So again, we have a Jewish parallel structure here, as we see so often in the Proverbs. And the first half says, better is a dinner with herbs, vegetables. It's better to eat vegetables with love, with people you like, people that you share a love, you share a trust with, than it is to eat fatted oxen, fat meat, a ribeye, with people of hatred. And we all know this. I also want to note here, and I get flack for this all the time, talking about meat, and I come from this family of meat. But this proverb assumes that eating a dinner of herbs is not as good as eating fatted ox. In other words, it presumes that a vegetable meal is not as good, as satisfying, as pleasurable than a meat-based meal. But the secret sauce that makes even a vegetable meal, even a salad, wonderful and beautiful is love. Love is the secret sauce. Love is the sauce that makes everything taste good. We're going to talk about that in today's show. So let's jump into our featured segment. I've got a number of blessings that come from preparing food. I'm going to start right out the gate with this idea of danger. You may not have ever thought about prepping food as dangerous, but it actually is pretty dangerous. We're talking about knives and fire. I would guess that most of the time that Joy and I hurt ourselves, especially Joy, if she has a Band-Aid on her finger, she either cut herself making a meal or she burned herself. And it can get really dangerous in an ancient context, because a cut when you're cutting meat or preparing food can become easily infected. Also, fire was not as easily contained. They didn't have gas stoves. They had fires, and fire can be dangerous, not only to your fingers or your face, but to your surrounding habitat, your geography. You don't want to burn down your house, your neighborhood, your forest, or whatever it is. So this element of danger in cooking means that whenever you cook, you have to have attentiveness. So it's not something passive like watching TV or even walking or running. It requires you to have attention to what you are doing, because there's always a danger there. What's interesting about this is, and psychologists have found this as well, that there are basically two types of mind restfulness. One is where you're just totally tapped out, passive, like watching a television show. Another is where you're relaxed by having attention toward something. This happens often in exercise. It's a relaxed state that requires attention, and the attention doesn't make us fatigued like it does at work. It's actually relaxing. So this is like playing chess or playing a game. And cooking has the same kind of attentiveness, and it can be the same kind of relaxation. Now, I know that when you're a father of many kids or a mother of many children, there's kids running around and you're trying to do homework and you're trying to cut the onions and thaw the meat, it can get stressful. But I'm talking about making cooking a recreation. And it can have the same effect. And I've been cooking a lot more lately. I mentioned in the last podcast that I did this Whole30 and I did this paleo experiment. I'm still going on it. But it's required me not to just eat snacks and things in wrappers. It requires me to actually plan ahead and cook meals. And this is really where this meditation of today's podcast comes from, is this thinking of connection with food. And what I found is, as I'm preparing the food, and I have to, watch the heat, and I have to use more knives, and I find myself sharpening knives a lot more regularly. Fortunately, my father taught me how to sharpen knives well. There is a relaxation in cooking and prepping food. And I think that has to do, and that brings us to the second point here, with the meditative element of creating something, doing art. Before, I've talked about how it's important for us to be creative and to do art in some form in your life. You need to be doing something artistic because we were made to be recreative. That is recreation. Recreation is recreation. God is delighted when we take his creation and we recreate. We recreate. We create a story. We create a painting. We create a song. We create a meal. And I think this wonderful interplay between the recreation, the recreating, you're taking something that was alive, it's dead now, and you're preparing it so that it can go into you and have life for yourself. You mix that with the danger, with the fact that you have to be attentive so you don't burn your hand in grease or chop off the tip of your finger. And what you get is kind of a high performance. I mean, not like a decathlon or something like that, but a high performance activity that's creative, but also has a little bit of, it's a little bit of risk that requires your attention. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned in a previous podcast, we were, hunting, and we were preparing this meat, and we were cutting hundreds of pounds of meat, preparing it for our families to eat. And we were talking, but you can't just kind of goof off and get too much into the moment and start talking. You had to always watch your fingertips and always watch your knife or go and resharpen your knife. You always had to be attentive. And in fact, I did cut the tip of my finger because I was actually talking to someone while I was cutting. So this requires you to be in the moment. So they call this being in the zone. It happens when you do things like play chess or when you're playing a sport. And what psychologists have found, doctors have found, is that this kind of relaxation is extremely therapeutic. It actually does relax you more than a completely passive activity. For example, watching a movie, watching TV, sitting there listening to music. All that's good. I do all that stuff as well. But we also need this kind of attentive relaxation. The third thing is when we have contact with our food. Maybe you even prepare, maybe you raise animals. I think that's awesome. Maybe you raise chickens. I have a friend who just, my friend Jordan Lowe, who's the godfather of my kids, of some of my children, he's raising pigs as a food source for his family. Chickens. I know other people who do the same thing. And in Texas, I think it's more common. But you have a connection with your food source, which means you have a reverence and an honor for those animals and for those vegetables. But also you see it from its growth and its maturity and then its death and then in its preparation and then the cooking and then in the consumption. And it makes you waste less money and also waste less life. There's something, I found since I've been eating a little bit more clean and not eating all the, prepackaged food, there's something, I'm not a Buddhist, so I don't want to say Zen-like, that's the wrong word, but there's something reflective. I know what the right word is. I think the right word is sacramental. There's something sacramental in being in touch with your food and preparing it. Like we say in Mass, the work of human hands. It's nice to have your own two human hands in the process of recreating a meal, a food, a banquet even. And I think this extends to the next point, which is, and so far, just in case you're keeping track, we've talked about danger, we've talked about meditation and relaxation, we've talked about not wasting, and this fourth one is connection with life in general. I have found that people who are not around food are, I don't want to say always, and I don't want to say generally, it's just an observation that I've had, and I might be wrong, but people who are not around food and don't cook food and don't prepare food, don't raise food, maybe, and I know people don't like hunting, but don't hunt food, who don't see how food goes from the land of animals and plants growing to their hand, to their dinner plate. These people are not as tapped into life. They're not tapped into life. They're a little bit, this is my observation, I think they're a little bit more disconnected. And they usually have funny ideas about nature and animals, and they're grossed out about any animal dying, but yet they'll eat some really gross, overly processed hamburger or fried chicken sandwich, or they'll eat potatoes fried in some ungodly grease, or vegetable oils, and they'll do things that just don't make sense. And, they also can live unhealthy lifestyles. And I think, unfortunately, this is true for lots of young people, especially in impoverished areas, inner cities, poor areas. They don't have a connection with their food. And there's been some really neat nonprofits started up who have started these urban gardens and have even, allowed, youth to raise chickens and acquire eggs and get them in touch with the animals and the plants that provide their food. People who eat high amounts of processed food, they usually depend on a very low nutrient kind of food, such as simple sugars, high fructose corn syrup, cheap grains, lots of preservatives, and as a result, they're not as healthy as they could be. So I think that not only does it give us a connection to life, it brings us to our next point, it gives us health. By seeing the circle of life and appreciating that and honoring it. See, a lot of people think that if you kill an animal, you somehow don't like animals or you're mean. It's not the case at all. Things have to die for us to live, and we can have a reverence for it. If you look in the Old Testament, they are killing animals daily, all day long at the temple as a form of sacrifice, which in the Old Covenant was pleasing to God because it foreshadowed the coming of Christ. But the priest had a reverence for the animals, and the people had a reverence for the animals. It wasn't slaughter for the sake of slaughter. That's wrong. That's bad. It was the slaughter, again, for a sacramental purpose, to bring about atonement, to point towards redemption, ultimately to point towards our Lord Jesus Christ. And this sacramental connection creates a creation to life, not just natural life, like our own natural families and our natural food sources, but the supernatural life, the indwelling of the Holy Trinity, the life of God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So I mentioned just a second ago, health. If you control the flow of your food, not only where it comes from, but how it's prepared, you will be more healthy. You will be in better shape. It's just like a computer. You can constantly throw, or your phone, apps on it, software, Like just plug up the hard drive and put stuff on it. You can keep doing that, but eventually your computer is going to slow down. It's going to break. It's going to freeze. And that happens to our bodies as well. You can keep throwing junk into it, right? But it's going to slow down and break. And unfortunately, you can't just go down to the Apple store and buy a new body. You only got the one body you've got. So there's a health element in cooking and preparing. You're going to eat better. You're going to eat cleaner. You're probably going to lose weight. Your skin will be better. Your hair will be better. You'll begin to educate yourself and your family about good foods, quality foods that come from good sources without all the preservatives and hormones and antibiotics that are unneeded. You get the point. Now, the next point is one that we all relate to, and that is enjoyment, pleasure. Food tastes good. Food tastes good. I don't have a PhD in meat science like my dad. I have a PhD in philosophy. And I sometimes say, do you know why this meat is so good? And people say, why? Because it tastes good. Right? That's a philosopher's take on food. Food is good because it tastes good. And God designed our taste buds, and he took delight in creating our taste buds and all the different variety from salty to sweet to savory to hot to cold. There's a pleasure in eating food. And there's nothing wrong with making your food taste good. There's ingredients and spices and getting fresh foods and fresh ingredients and sharing it with other people. And that's the extended amount of pleasure that we gain from food. Food is meant to be shared. We have great pleasure, great enjoyment when we share our food. And this comes from a philosophical principle that goes, back to the ancient Greeks, to Plato. It's picked up by Dionysius, the Areopagite. It's repeated again by St. Thomas Aquinas. The good diffuses itself. The good spreads itself about. Whatever is good does not get hidden or hoarded. Whatever is good gets shared. You taste it. Ooh, taste this. You've got to experience this. When we experience something good, we want other people to experience the good. You read a great book. You say, oh, this book was so good. You've got to read it. You experience the good from the book. You want someone else to experience it. And then when they read the book and you start talking about it, it makes the book even better because now you're having a shared communal experience. By the way, this is how the gospel is supposed to work. We experience the love of Jesus Christ. We experience the power of the Holy Eucharist, and we go to other people and say, oh, you've got to experience this. Oh, the Eucharist you've got to experience the Eucharist. That's how we do true evangelization. That's how we share the good news. That's how it happened in the early church. That's how it happened under the persecutions. You've got to experience this goodness. Well, the same thing's true of our food. We want to share it with other people. Yesterday, I went to a mass that I don't usually go to during the week, a daily mass, and I was running late and I had an appointment, so I needed to get back. So I went to a nice restaurant that I wouldn't normally go to, but I needed to get some food, and it was nearby, and then I needed to get back to the office. And I went by myself, and I ordered, a good meal, and it was fajitas. I ordered fajitas. But as I was sitting in the restaurant, I just thought of all the dates I'd been there with my wife, the times I'd been there with my family, how I'd been there recently with my friend Jordan, and it was Pappasito's is where I was at. And the food was good, but I had an epiphany. I said, food would be better. This food would be better if I had someone to talk to. There's something about being around the table and enjoying the food together, and talking about the food or just talking about whatever, that makes the experience magnified, more glorious, more tasty. So with food, there's this, two-tier pleasure. The first is it's this physical manifestation. This tastes good. It tastes salty and savory. I like it. Or it tastes sweet and fresh. But then there's this, I think, even more important pleasure that we derive from sharing food with other people. Food is always better when you're with others. And this brings us to the next point, and that is the preparation of food, cooking, as it relates to culture. Cooking and culture. Cooking and preparing meals relates to major benchmarks in human life. And I think, in particular, the Catholic life, because we Catholics have a watermarked series of sacramental rites that we go through in our life. Thomas Aquinas says that the sacraments punctuate the spiritual life just as there are natural punctuation marks in the progress of natural human life. For example, birth. We have baptism. Whenever there's a baptism, I don't know about you, but there's always a reception. We always have people over at our house. We have the priest over. We have food, like barbecue down here in Texas. I've really been lately I want to get back into it even more, but smoking meats, making that perfect brisket. It's like a 15-hour commitment. It's not just like, making an egg or, boiling some pasta. The brisket is like a sculpture. And it takes time and smoke and care. It's like a full commitment when you smoke a brisket, and boy, it tastes good. Sorry, sidetracked there. We got baptisms. There's first communions where we have food, and then there's confirmation, and we have food and parties, and then there's dating. Historically, whether you call it courtship or dating, the coming together of males and females and that progress from not knowing each other to being married and having a baby is punctuated by a series of meals. First, they're casual. Maybe it's an ice cream cone. But eventually, it works up towards more formal meals. For example, when a young man asks for a girl's hand in marriage, it often accompanies a meal with that girl's father and mother, with the family. And that meal is important because it symbolizes that the young man is being brought into their family unit, that their daughter might be paired off with this man. And the food, the sitting around the table, marks it. It signifies it. And the same thing happens in business deals. A big business deal happens between two companies or one company and an individual, or someone gets hired to the corporation or business. What do? They go for a meal, a ceremonial meal. We see it at wedding receptions. Lots of money, lots of effort goes into these banquets for a marriage to celebrate what just happened. A man and a woman were sacramentally united together. Let's celebrate. Let's come together, not just with that man and the woman and their parents, but with the whole family and all the relatives and all the friends and maybe even some strangers. Let's come together and celebrate with a meal. And we see Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and Jesus Christ himself doing this very thing at the wedding of Cana. They are there at the reception. They're not so ascetic that they say, well, we're just going to go home and pray for you guys. We're not going to the party. No, they come to the banquet. They come to the meal, and they bless it. They turn water into wine. And we even see this at funerals. After someone dies and after we celebrate their life and remember them, there's food. Food is there yet again. And of course, all of this reminds us of the Most Holy Sacrament, the Eucharist. This is the source and summit of Christian life. It is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. We come together. The most meaningful thing that we can do as human beings on earth is to receive the Eucharist. And I always stress this in my books and in my podcast and in the blog post I write and at the New St. Thomas Institute. A lot of people are offended because they think, Catholics are just trying to proselytize people. We're just trying to win converts. Or, the Crusades was just trying to proselytize people in the East. Or missionaries when they went to, Micronesia or Asiatic colonies were just trying to proselytize. I think that we Catholics should think of it primarily as, I want every single human on earth to experience the glory and the joy and the beauty of eating the body of Christ. We are on a mission related to eating. And no one can fault you for that. No one can say, well, you're just trying to win converts. No. I'm trying to share with as many people as I can the good news of Christ so that they can experience the joy of this very simple meal, which is also a sacrifice, the body and blood of Jesus Christ. The sacrament that he instituted on the night in which he was betrayed before he suffered. And this really brings us full circle, doesn't it? Food, the preparation of food, is thoroughly sacramental. And I think God, when he designed the universe, before humans were around, before planets were around, before anything was around, before there was even light, before there was the first angel, he could have devised a way for humans to just get energy from air. You just breathe in and out, and that gives you calories. He could have done it that way. But instead, he chose for the entire animal kingdom, and that includes us, by the way. We are rational animals, as Thomas Aquinas says, but we are nonetheless animals. We're not brute animals, but we are animals. We have nostrils and cells and a digestive system, just like the ox or the cat or the squirrel. When he designed us that we could only live if something dies. The only way you are alive right now is because things have died so that you could live. There's sacrifice built into the fabric of creation. Well, you might say, well, I'm a vegetarian, Taylor. I don't eat all that nasty meat like you carnivores do. No, you kill things. That salad died. That carrot dies. The bacteria in your stomach dies and gives you life, gives you protein. Everything we eat has to die in order to give us life. Things that are non-living, like a rock, go out and eat rocks for a few weeks. You'll die. It doesn't work. You have to eat something alive. It must die, and then you will have life. So if this morning, I had some chicken. That chicken had to die for me to have the energy and the life to create this podcast for you today. And yesterday for breakfast, I had a salad, and those strawberries and the blueberries and the lettuce and the onions, all of those things died so that I could do my vocation yesterday. And ultimately, this is the lesson for us as not just Christians, but as humans. Sacrifice. Death brings life. You might say, well, what about, before sin? What if there hadn't been original sin? Would that still be true? It would still be true. Adam and Eve were called by God to cultivate the garden and to name the animals. And what do we see their first two sons doing, Cain and Abel? Cain is a farmer. He's growing crops. He's offering these crops as sacrifices to God. Abel, what is he doing? He's a shepherd. He's cultivating animals and offering them to God. You don't cultivate animals for fun. You cultivate animals in antiquity for food. Just Cain was cultivating vegetables for food. Abel was cultivating animals for food. These things died so that these humans could live. And it was teaching a very important principle. That's this: life comes from life. We see it not only in the beautiful arrangement of procreation, but we also see it in the realm of nutrition. Life comes from life. Nutrition comes from nutrition. In order for you to live and to sustain your activity as a human person created by God, Life must constantly be injected into you. We call that food. And it must be cooked, usually. You can eat raw food. But we know that ancient humans going way, way, way back were cooking their food. It makes it more nutritious. It makes us able to consume more nutritious food. For example, meat and even organ meats as well, which our ancestors loved to eat. We're not so fond of them anymore, but they loved them. Life comes from life. And this signifies that we cannot meet our final end, which is beatific joy, the beatific vision, union with God, what Thomas Aquinas calls becoming deiform, in the image and likeness of God to such an extent that we are united to Him. We cannot experience our final human goal unless life is constantly poured into us. And what is that life? It is the life of grace. So the supernatural elevates and perfects the natural. What food is for us on the natural level, grace is on the supernatural level. Well, we'll close up there and we'll move on to our tip of the week, which is related to food, and then our Latin word of the week. Just before I jump into the tip of the week here, I just want to thank everyone who's downloaded that free study guide for my novel, Sword and Serpent. If you have read the book or you're planning to read the book or you've recently purchased it, I'd really encourage you to go to swordandserpent.com, and I've put together a free study guide that goes over the characters and some of the historical things that will help you, but also has some study questions that would be ideal for a group study or a book group. I recently just gave a book group presentation to a large group of ladies who had read the book. It was lots of fun, and some of the questions that we covered in that live event are also in this free study guide. So again, The Sword and Serpent, it's a novel about St. George and the Dragon. It's my historical retelling of that epic legend, and it got to #1 on Amazon in its genre, and it's been very popular. So I'd encourage you to check it out. You can go to Amazon.com and just search my name or Sword and Serpent. You can get the book there. And again, you can get the free study guide and print it out over at swordandserpent.com. Also, a lot of people have been asking about enrolling for New St. Thomas Institute, and I'm sorry, it is closed. We closed up several weeks ago and sold out. The New St. Thomas Institute is a place where I teach Catholic theology online through high-def videos and podcasts like this. We have 3 certificates, 1 in philosophy, 1 in theology, and 1 in apologetics. But we will be making more spots available in the future. We haven't decided here at the New St. Thomas Institute when we will open up spots again. But you can get on the waiting list, and that's what we tell people who want to join and who missed the window. Just go to newstthomas.com and click on the button towards the top where it says get on the priority waiting list, and you will be on the priority waiting list, first come, first serve, and you'll be notified when we make spots available in the future. Again, just go to newstthomas.com. Okay, tip of the week. My tip of the week is to plan and have a cooking event at your home. So last week I spoke about attitude and food, about sometimes when we have a bad attitude or we have stress or anxiety, sometimes it's related to our diet. We're eating a lot of sugar, we're drinking too much alcohol, too many processed foods. Our body's just taxed, and so we're kind of in a bad mood. So what we want to do is eat better food, and one of the ways we can do that and share that and diffuse the good, right, spread out the good, is to cook together. So if you're married, cook with your spouse. If you have children, cook with your children. That's always great fun to teach children how to cook. You want to be careful they don't get burned or cut. My 2-year-old Elizabeth always pushes up a chair. She can't speak much, but when Daddy's cooking, she gets her apron and she pushes a chair up and she wants to be involved. And just, give the little one a plastic spoon or a wooden spoon. If they're holding something, they think they're doing something and they're having a great time. They'll laugh, they'll have a good time. And if you're single, get together a group of friends. When I was single, this was always a great way to have fun. It doesn't cost much money, and it's hours of fun, and it brings people together. Put together a menu you've never done before, or a kind of food that you've never prepared. And, maybe one person in the group has done it, Maybe they can be your coach, your guide, but like Thai food or Indian food or something exotic, and come together and cook it as a team and then sit down together and enjoy it. I promise you, it will taste so good. Best of all, you'll begin to experience all the points that we went through above about the theology of cooking and preparing food, and you'll do it as a group. So, call your wife, today if you're listening to it and say, hey, why don't we cook together? She might drop the phone. Say, hey, let's cook together. I want to cook. Let's get crazy. Or, maybe it's something as easy. I love to do this. Hey, let's do burgers tonight on the grill. Let's chop the tomatoes. Let's chop the lettuce. Let's chop the onions. Let's get some really, get some good grass-fed beef or any kind of good beef. And I'll fire up the grill and we'll make homemade burgers and we can toast the buns and maybe make some, good apple smoked bacon to put on it, or, get some avocados and slice them and put them on there. And instead of doing potato chips, why don't we make like a fruit salad and, just get creative and have a fun meal and get all the kids involved and then share it together. So tip of the week, have a fun cooking event at your home with your family or your friends. And before we get to the Latin word of the week, I just want to remind all the new listeners that you can get a free gift. A free book is waiting for you at taylormarshall.com. It's called Thomas Aquinas in 50 Pages. It's my 50-page presentation of all the basic comments, that's not what I meant, all the basic concepts of Catholic philosophy and theology as taught by Thomas Aquinas. I was at daily Mass a week or so ago, and someone said, hey, I read Thomas Aquinas 50 Pages. Thank you so much. I've always wanted to study Thomas Aquinas, but I was always blockaded by some of the vocabulary and some of the words. And this book, especially the glossary in the back, helped me understand these basic words so then I could begin to read Thomas Aquinas. And of course, that makes my heart just so happy to hear that, because that's the intention of the book. So head on over to taylormarshall.com, upper right-hand corner. You can download Thomas Aquinas in 50 pages. Also, I want to give a shout out to some of the other people who left really awesome reviews for this podcast over at iTunes. We've already talked about Lauren and Haroldina, who talked about the thermal screw. We also have EEGH, who left a 5-star review. Thank you so much. And then we have Schutz, who left a really awesome 5-star review and a comment here about learning about divine law and natural law and making everything very simple and practical in this podcast. So thanks so much for that. And he also left a question here, and it's great because he knows that I read these. So Schutz writes, Dr. Marshall, I know you read these, so I would also love to make a podcast request. And he writes, being an entrepreneur yourself, how do you manage your priorities in life? I'm sure your work is endless. How do you manage how much time you put in with work and how much with family, rest, and prayer? How do you make those decisions? Great question, something I struggle with every single day, something my wife Jo and I are always talking about and always calibrating and trying to find that balance. And I think I will do a podcast in the future. I've touched on all those topics tangentially in previous shows, but I think I will dedicate one in the future. So thanks for that request and idea, Schutz. It's awesome. And then one more shout out here goes to Spitz Llama. And Spitz Llama, I don't know if this is a male or female, but he or she writes, Dr. Marshall's clear, friendly, honest, and entertaining way of guiding us through the complexities of thousands of years of development of Catholic theology, philosophy, and church history is a relief. He combines delicate detail with current culture in an affable way. I spent years hacking with my pocket knife through such scholastic brambles. His guidance is awesome help. Well, thanks so much, Spitz Llama. And thank you to all of you who have left comments. I actually read every single one of them, and I will give you a shout out here on the podcast and share some of your thoughts or questions or whatever you have on the Taylor Marshall Show. Just go over to iTunes, head on into iTunes and search Taylor Marshall Show. And the reason that I asked this, and I mention it every time, it encourages me, but more importantly, it helps this podcast get found in the iTunes jungle. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands maybe, of podcasts over at iTunes, And the more podcast gets recommended and gets 5-star reviews and gets comments and shares, the more it gets found by people in the iTunes jungle. So by writing a review and leaving a comment like that, you really help other people find this show, and more people every day are finding this show. So thanks so much to all of you who have left a review. Now, the moment you've been waiting for, the Latin word of the week, and it is the verb coquo. Coquo means I cook. I cook. Now, what's great about this verb is it means not only to cook, and of course we get the English word to cook from this Latin verb, comes straight over. It means also to prepare food, to ripen, as in ripen fruit, to digest food. So that's actually cooking. If you think about it, the preparation of the food doesn't just end on the griddle. It also continues when you chew it. And then when it goes into your stomach and the stomach acids begin to break it down. In the Latin frame of mind, it's still cooking there in your stomach. But what I think is the most interesting definition of this Latin word is it came to mean over time in Latin to turn over in the mind. So they applied the idea of cooking to thinking. And we don't do this in English. That's why I love it. In English, I don't say, well, I was cooking the other day. I was cooking about that. Or I was cooking. I guess we could say we cook up thoughts. But we don't usually talk that way in English. But in Latin, coquo can mean I cook in the sense that I am turning something like a rotisserie. Think of a rotisserie piece of meat just rotating over the flames and just getting more and more juicy and more tasty. And it's just, I can smell it now. It's just turning over. The Romans took that imagery and placed it in the mind. So you have a thought, an idea, a business idea, a book idea, an idea of something to do with your kids, and you put it in your mind, it's over the flames, and it's just rotating, turning it over and over, cooking it thoroughly. And it just begins to drip, and it just becomes perfect, so you can sink your teeth into it. And I think all this lines up with the earlier part of our featured segment today, that cooking can be a form of meditative activity. You have to be aware, you have to be present in the moment because you have knives and fire, but you're doing something in a linear way that is, or it can be, relaxing. So, coquo, I cook. It means I cook, I prepare, but also I turn something over in my mind. Well, I hope I cooked up a great show today, some things to think about, some things to put in practice. As we say at the beginning of every show, daily habits and enough theology. So after you finish this podcast, pull out your phone, call up your spouse, your kids, your friends, get some people over in the next few days and cook something together. Share that fellowship, and who knows, maybe share some of this theology, some of this reflection on we must have life from life, and that there is something sacramental, even something sacred, in cooking and eating food. And until next time, remember our Lord Jesus Christ said that you are the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty. Be salty is kind of a cooking metaphor. Be salty. Season the meat of your life. Sprinkle a little salt, but don't be too salty. Nobody likes food that's too salty.
This podcast was brought to you by the New St. Thomas Institute. Discover online Catholic classes and earn your certificate in Catholic Theology at the New St. Thomas Institute. To register for online Catholic classes, please visit newstthomas.com. That's newstthomas.com.